Welcome to Christian Virtual Fellowship, the online church for allegiance to the King. We are going to be continuing our study today of Isaiah, what I'm calling the first gospel. In today's session, we're going to be looking at Isaiah chapters 5 through 39, but this is obviously a very long section. So we're only going to do an overview of this section today. I'm not going to go deep and into any particular piece of this. I just want to I want to talk about the structure and the different pieces and what's going on at a high level. Then in future sessions, we'll go back through this in pieces and dig deeper into each of those sections. But let's do a little bit of review. The first is the message of Isaiah, reminding ourselves what the message of Isaiah is, that God is judging his people. They're guilty of gross violation of the covenant, and he's also going to judge the nations. Yet God is going to save a repentant and obedient remnant, which will include a repentant and obedient remnant from the nations. Therefore, Zion, the city of God, the true people of Israel, will be saved and enter God's glorious kingdom, and the wicked, on the other hand, will be destroyed. So that's the overall message of Isaiah. And within this is the gospel plan. The first piece being that God has good reason for judgment, that he has tried over and over again to get people to be obedient to him. And he's been trying to do that through, national deliverance for the most part. That's what people were expecting. And it really hasn't worked, where he's trying to work through the nation of Israel and get them to follow and obey him as a whole people, and that hasn't worked. So therefore, he's going to have to deal with individual sin first. That sin has to go, and that's got to get dealt with. And the way he's going to do that is to send a Messiah who's going to accomplish taking care of sin and getting rid of sin, and that Messiah is going to build God's people, his kingdom, through his people, built by building up a people first. And then finally, God is going to bring his rule over the whole earth by purging the wicked and restoring his paradise for that remnant, those repentant followers that are willing to follow that Messiah. So that's the gospel. I want to give an overall structure of Isaiah. I haven't had this slide in here before in the previous sessions, and I want to introduce this because I think this is helpful. That chapter 1 is a short introduction, and its emphasis is on judgment. Chapter 2 is an expanded introduction of the whole topic, and its emphasis is on judgment as well. Then chapters 5 through 39, they're focused on judgment. There are pieces within that have to do with deliverance and restoration, but for the most part, it's focused on judgment. Then chapters 40 through 48 are focused on deliverance, how God is going to bring about this rescue, this redemption. And then chapters 49 through 57 are focused on the restoration piece of this whole message. And then finally, these last two sections, the chapter 58 through 64, is an expanded summary with an emphasis on deliverance and restoration as opposed to judgment. And in each and every one of these cases, you're going to get some level of mix of all three pieces, but each area is going to have an emphasis where you're getting most of whatever that piece is. And then finally, in chapters 65 through 66, there's a short summary, again, with an emphasis on deliverance and restoration. So you can kind of see by looking at this outline how the book of Isaiah is structured. Isaiah, so far, what have we learned so far? In chapter 1, the introduction summary, we learned that that God is condemning the nation of Israel as a whole, but there is a little bit of hope in that he's especially condemning the people's relation to God, how they're relating to God, but giving them a recipe for salvation, for deliverance. And finally, a poetic picture of God turning social injustice and unrighteousness into justice and righteousness, which is his whole plan. That's the plan of the gospel. Chapters 2 through 4 is the expanded introduction. And we see in this expanded introduction, we see the theme of judgment, a condemnation of sin and injustice. We see a theme of deliverance, the cleansing of sin and injustice. And we see a restoration, God's righteous remnant inheriting God's restored paradise. And the expanded introduction introduces the fact that the nations, everybody other than the nation of Israel, are going to be included in what God is doing. Okay, so from a very high standpoint in terms of what's going on with chapters 5 through 39, its overall theme is that of judgment. And the focus throughout the entire section, there are pieces that are all about deliverance and restoration, things like that. But the overall focus of the entire section is judgment. God pronounces judgment on Israel. He pronounces judgment on Assyria, who he's going to use to punish Israel. He pronounces judgment on the nations around Israel, and he pronounces judgment on all of humanity. And he demonstrates that he's going to carry out his judgments by fulfilling prophecies. Some of these judgments that are actually contained within the book of Isaiah are actually carried out during the lifetime of Isaiah, which is interesting. And so he's going to carry out these judgments by fulfilling prophecies concerning Ephraim, which is the northern kingdom of Israel, Judah, the southern kingdom of Israel, Aram, which the capital was Damascus, and Assyria, the capital was Nineveh, and where Assyria is going to be used as God's instrument throughout throughout all of this section 5 through 39, except the very, very end where he's going to talk about what Babylon's going to do in his plan. All throughout this section, Assyria is a key piece to understand in terms of what God is doing. But he's going to fulfill all of these different prophecies to show that all of the judgments that he's making, all these prophetic judgments that he's making, he's going to carry out all of them, even the ones that are going to happen in the future from now on the day of judgment. But there is hope for deliverance and restoration, so that we are going to see that even throughout this whole section on judgment. Over and over again, he's going to bring it back to this idea that he is going to deliver, he is going to restore, and he's going to show how that's going to take place. He'll expand on those in the later part of Isaiah. Let's look at the structure of chapters 5 through 39. What we're going to do, I'm going to give you a quick overview of the structure, and then of the whole of 5 through 39. And then what we're going to do is there's two pieces to 5 through 39, and we're going to do a quick overview of each of those two pieces. We're not going to go into a lot of detail today. It's way too much material to do that. We'll come back in the next few sessions and break down this structure and these pieces in more detail, probably in at least 3, if not 4 or even 5 sessions. So the first section of 5 through 39, I'm just going to call it the judgment section from now on, is chapters 5 through 12. It's a palistrophe. I'll explain, if you're not familiar with that, here in a second, what that is, where God is decreeing judgment and deliverance for Israel. And then there's a second section, chapters 13 through 39, again, is also a palistrophe, and it's where God's judgment and deliverance is expanding to the nations. And just as a reminder, a palistrophe is a kind of literary format, a kind of ancient poetic format that works like this. You have a series of themes that are repeated in a succession where you have theme A and then theme B, and then you'll have a focal point C, and you could have even more. You could have theme A, theme B, theme C, theme D, but eventually you're going to get to a focal point, and this is what makes a palistrophe different than some of the other poetic forms you'll see in the Bible. And then it goes back to theme B, and then back to theme A. So it creates this sort of arrowhead, if you will. And a big part of the purpose of that is the A themes and the B themes and all that kind of stuff. They're driving you to really think about the focal point and what's going on there. That's the focus. So this is the format of a palistrophe. Both of these sections, I would argue, are in that format. And so we're going to break that down. We'll start off with chapters 5 through 12. And looking at this is the God decreeing judgment and deliverance for Israel. It begins in chapter 5, verses 1 through 7 with a song, and the Song of the Vineyard, which is a judgment song. Then it goes into another little section where God is decreeing judgment because of injustice and sin, and he's going to indicate in a small way how he's going to accomplish this. Then it gets to the focal point, which is the call of God's agent. And I'm using that. Obviously, it's the call of Isaiah. But I think it's important as you go through this section to recognize that Isaiah is God's agent and that he is a type of the Messiah. And we're going to see that even in that section, 6:1 through 9:7. And that judgment and deliverance are given to this agent to announce it, to carry this out in the world, that sort of thing. That's how God works through his agents. And that Isaiah, again, is a type of the coming Messiah who's going to do what Isaiah is doing on a grand scale. Then we come back to our B theme, chapter 9, verse 8 through chapter 11 through 16, where God is again decreeing judgment because of injustice and sin, and he's indicating how he will accomplish it. But in this section, he's also going to show how he's going to save a remnant. So you've got the decree of judgment and the how of both, how the judgment is going to be carried out and how he's going to actually make a way out. And then finally, going back to our theme A, we have the wrap up with another song, a song of thanksgiving or deliverance. And so we're going from judgment to deliverance. And so that I want to go into each of these pieces just quickly. I'm probably going to leave a lot of questions, but we just don't have time. We got to do a quick overview today. So I'm going to go ahead and just read the Song of the Vineyard. The two songs, we'll just read them. Most of the other section, I'll give you a little smattering of verses, and we're not going to go through the whole sections. Isaiah chapter 5, 1 through 7 says, "Let me sing now for my beloved a song of my beloved about his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a fertile hill. He dug it all around, cleared it of stones, and planted it with the choicest vine. And he built a tower in the middle of it, and also carved out a wine vat in it. Then he expected it to produce good grapes, but it produced only worthless ones. And now, you inhabitants of Jerusalem and people of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done in it? Why, when I expected it to produce good grapes, did it produce worthless ones? So now let me tell you what I am going to do to my vineyard. I will remove its hedge, and it will be consumed. I will break down its wall, and it will become trampled ground. I will lay it waste. It will not be pruned nor hoed, but briars and thorns will come up. I will also command the clouds not to rain on it. For the vineyard of the Lord of armies is the house of Israel, and the people of Judah are his delightful plant. So he waited for justice, but behold, there was bloodshed. For righteousness, but behold, a cry for help." All throughout the book of Isaiah, you're going to get some songs. And these songs are really important because they really help to, in a short poetic way, encapsulate what God is getting at throughout the entire book. So again, we're not going to spend time on this, but it begins with this song. In chapter 5, 8 through 30, so this is our next section in that palistrophe, God is going to decree judgment because of injustice and sin, and he's going to indicate how he's going to accomplish it. And I just want to give you a couple little verse sections that demonstrate that this is the theme going on throughout this section. So Isaiah 5, 8 through 9 says, "Woe to those who attach house to house and join field to field until there is no more room, and you alone are a landowner in the midst of the land. In my ears, the Lord of armies has sworn, many houses shall certainly become desolate, even great and fine ones without occupants. So we can see that the judgment coming out. And in this case, what's happening is the wealthy are buying up all of the land and property, and that's creating problems for people in general. And it's the greed that's doing that. And then we see in Isaiah 5:26, we see God saying he will also, or Isaiah saying about God, he will also lift up a flag to the distant nation and a whistle for it from the ends of the earth. And behold, it will come with speed swiftly. This is Assyria that he's talking about. And we'll find that out later in the Palistrophe. But it's that they're going to come and they're going to do this work of God to bring about this judgment that God is decreeing. And so we can, as we'll get in a future session, we'll go deeper into this. But this whole section, that these are two good examples of what's going on. In the next piece of the Palistrophe, which is the focal point of the Palistrophe, chapter 6, verse 1 through chapter 9, verse 7, this is the call of God's agent, and the judgment and deliverance that God is wanting to decree are given to the agent. In this case, it's Isaiah. And in chapter 6, it's beginning with the call of Isaiah. And verses 8 through 9, it says, "Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then I said," this is Isaiah speaking, "Then I said, here am I, send me. And he, God, said, go and tell this people, keep on listening, but do not understand, and keep on looking, but do not gain knowledge." And so we can see here, this is, again, God is asking for an agent to go and decree judgment and the deliverance and restoration as well, but on the people. And so Isaiah says, I will go. And so he becomes God's agent. In Isaiah 7:17, it says, Yahweh will bring on you, on your people and on your father's house, such days as you have not come, have not come since the day that Ephraim separated from Judah, the days of the king of Assyria. So what we're seeing here is the days of the king of Assyria are going to be really bad. This is going to be a bad time, and not just for just for the people of Ephraim, the northern kingdom, but on Judah as well, on all the surrounding kingdoms. And Assyria had the first professional army in the history that we know of, anyway, and it was very, very effective, and they really devastated a bunch of nations. And so the days of the king of Assyria were not good. So we see this judgment that Isaiah is decreeing on God's behalf. And then in Isaiah chapter 9, verses 6 through 7, we read this famous passage, "For a child will be born to us, a son will be given to us, and the government will rest on his shoulders, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. There will be no end to the increase of his government or of peace on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and righteousness from then on and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord, of the Yahweh of armies, will accomplish this." So we see this. It's not just decree of judgment. He's also an agent of decreeing God's deliverance and restoration as well. Then we have the next section of the Palistrophe, where we're going back to that theme B. This is chapters 9, 8 through verses 8 through 11. Verse 8 through chapter 11, verse 16, which is the end of chapter 11. God decrees judgment because of injustice and sin and indicates how he will accomplish it, but also how he will save a remnant. Okay, so it's the same theme B, except we're seeing this little additional piece of saving a remnant, which was introduced fully in the focal point. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 8 says, "The Lord sends a message against Jacob, and it falls on Israel." So again, we see this decree of judgment. In Isaiah 9:17, this is the middle section of that verse. "For every one of them is godless and an evildoer, and every mouth is speaking foolishness." And then in Isaiah 10, 5-6, the first part of verse 6, woe to Assyria, the rod of my anger, and the staff in whose hands is my indignation. I send it against a godless nation and commission it against the people of my fury. So now we're getting more detail about this, how that the theme B introduced, that God was going to call a distant nation to come carry out this judgment. And here we see that it's Assyria that's going to do that. And then in Isaiah chapter 10, verses 20 through 21, we read, now on that day, the remnant of Israel and those of the house of Jacob who have escaped will no longer rely on the one who struck them, which is an interesting prophecy going on, but will truly rely on Yahweh, the Holy One of Israel. A remnant will return, the remnant of Jacob, to the mighty God. So we see that he's introducing, but I'm going to save a remnant. And then the last piece of the first Palistrophe is the song of thanksgiving, a song of deliverance. And so I'm just going to read the song. It's not very long. It's chapter 12, verses 1-6. Then you will say on that day, I will give thanks to you, Yahweh, for although you were angry with me, your anger is turned away and you comfort me. Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. For Yahweh God is my strength and song. He has become my salvation. Therefore, you will joyously draw water from the springs of salvation. And on that day, you will say, give thanks to Yahweh, call on his name, make known his deeds among the peoples, make them remember that his name is exalted. Praise Yahweh in song, for he has done glorious things. Let this be known throughout the earth. Rejoice and shout for joy, you inhabitant of Zion, for great in your midst is the Holy One of Israel. So we see that, again, we have, this song or songs, depending on how you want to read it, that wraps up the section that's about the thanksgiving of the remnant, that they've been delivered, they've been saved, restored. And so it's bookending that first song of judgment. Okay, so that's the first Palistrophe. The second Palistrophe is chapters 13-39. It's the longest section of the book of Isaiah. And it comes in a number of pieces. It again is in this Palistrophe format. And let me, but God's judgment and deliverance expands to the nations. So let me explain that it's basically taking the same concepts that were in the first Palistrophe, and we're going to expand that out to the nations. And he's going to give a lot more detail about certain things going on and stuff like that. There's a number, just like in the first Palistrophe, I didn't explain this. In the first Palistrophe, you've got poems, like a song, things like that. You've got decrees of judgment. You have a narrative of the call of Isaiah, and it's pictured in this sort of almost an apocalyptic way. And then you have other narratives occurring in that section of historical narratives that are occurring. So, prophetic visions and all this kind of stuff, all these different things all coming together to create this one rounded out picture of the message. And so you've got that same thing going on here, where you've got all these different themes and genres and stuff like that, all bringing in this Palistrophe, taking that same message of judgment with restoration, deliverance and restoration, expanding out beyond the nation of Israel. It will include the nation of Israel. We'll see that in this section, but it's going to expand. Chapters 13-23. So this is our theme A. It's judgments against the nations and Israel. Israel's included in the list, but now the list of all these judgments. This is a long section. Some people like to call it the woes section of these woes against all these nations. And then we see chapter 24-27. This is judgment and deliverance for all people. Then we have the focal point, chapter 28-33, judgments and restoration for Israel. And there's chapter 31 is especially, I don't want to say that this is definitely the case, but I feel like chapter 31 is a good central point for the entire book of Isaiah. It's interesting, and we'll eventually get to that. Chapter 34 through 35, judgment and deliverance for all people. So we've gone back to that B theme again. And then chapters 36 through 39, again, judgments against Israel and nations. And again, these are all, so you've got these woe, decree, sort of poetic section 13 through 23. The 24 through 27, a lot of theologians will call this the little apocalypse because it has apocalyptic sort of genre ness to it. And then in like 36 through 39, you've got a historical narrative that's playing out the same theme of judgments against Israel as well as the nations. I should probably put that backwards. Judgment against nation. All right, so let's get into a little bit deeper overview of 13 through 23 in that should be 13 through 23 there. Pronouncements. I understand what I'm doing now. Okay. In chapters 13 through 21, we've got pronouncements against Babylon, Assyria, Philistia, Moab, Damascus, Ethiopia, Egypt, Edom, and Arabia. And then in chapter 22, we get a pronouncement against Israel. It's a little trickier to see this because he doesn't start off with, woe to you, Damascus, or something like that. It's woe to the valley of vision. But if you look at verses 4 through 11, you can see about Israel in this section. And then chapter 23 is a pronouncement against Tyre. And as you go through that particular pronouncement of judgment against Tyre, you can see, he's expanding it to the rest of the world. Then we get to the next section, the theme B section, chapters 24 through 27, the theme being judgment and deliverance for all people. This section and its corresponding section 34 through 35 are highly figurative. There's a lot of figurative imagery going on in these sections. In terms of judgment, we see an example in Isaiah 24:1. Behold, Yahweh lays the earth waste, devastates it, twists its surface, and scatters its inhabitants. In Isaiah 24:17, it reads, terror and pit and snare confront you, you inhabitant of the earth. And then for deliverance, we see in Isaiah 25:6 through 8, now Yahweh of armies will prepare a lavish banquet for all peoples on this mountain, a banquet of aged wine, choice pieces with marrow and refined aged wine. And then in Isaiah 27:2 through 6, it reads, on that day, a vineyard of beauty, sing of it. I, Yahweh, am its keeper. I water it every moment so that no one will damage it. I guard it night and day. I have no wrath. Should someone give me briars and thorns in battle, then I would step on them. I would burn them completely, or let him rely on my protection. Let him make peace with me. Let him make peace with me. In the days to come, Jacob will take root. Israel will blossom and sprout, and they will fill the whole world with fruit. So we can see both of these themes are going on, although we'll see a primary theme of judgment in that section. Chapter 28 through 33 is the next piece. This is our focal point for the Palistrophe. Again, we're seeing lots of stuff about judgments and restoration. In Isaiah 28:1, we see, woe to the proud crown of the habitually drunk of Ephraim, and to the fading flower of its glorious beauty, which is at the head of the fertile valley of those who are overcome with wine. In Isaiah 28:5, on that day, the Lord of armies, the Yahweh of armies, will become a beautiful crown and a glorious wreath to the remnant of his people. So in this section, one of the things that's happening is you'll get the judgment, restoration, judgment, restoration, judgment, restoration, kind of back and forth throughout this section. In Isaiah 29:1 through 3, it says, woe, Ariel. Ariel is basically it's a figurative term for Jerusalem, which is figurative for the people of God. Ariel, the city where David once camped, and year to year keep your feasts on schedule. I will bring distress to Ariel, and she will be a city of grieving and mourning. And don't do that yet. And she will be like an Ariel to me. I will camp against you, encircling you, and I will set up siege works against you, and I will raise up battle towers against you. Isaiah 29:5 then says, but the multitude of your enemies will become like fine dust, and the multitude of the ruthless ones like the chaff which blows away, and it will happen instantly and suddenly. And so, we see these themes kind of back and forth. And I'm not going to go into it today, but I highly recommend a reading chapter 31. It's kind of a distinct prophecy that's a summary teaching for the whole of the section, and really, it's sort of, you can sort of think of it as the central point of the entire book. One of the things that you sort of see throughout this middle focal point section is the concept that Israel is God's firstborn in all things, but that then means that Israel is God's firstborn to be judged and the firstborn to be delivered, but that God is going to bring these other these other sons, if you will, the other nations. They're going to go down that same path of judgment and deliverance in the same sort of way. And so that's I think that's a good picture to understand the central part of this palistrophe, the really the message of the entire book, and it becoming the message of the gospel itself. Then we go back to theme B, chapters 34 and 35, judgment and deliverance for all people. Isaiah, as a couple of examples here, Isaiah 34, 1-2 says, come near, you nations, to hear, and listen, you peoples. Let the earth and all it contains hear, and the world and all that springs from it. For Yahweh's anger is against all the nations, and his wrath against all their armies. He has utterly destroyed them. He has turned them over to slaughter. Isaiah 35, 3-4 says, strengthen the exhausted and make them make the feeble strong. Say to those with anxious heart, take courage, fear not. Behold, your God will come with vengeance. The retribution of God will come, but he will save you. And then in the last section, chapters 36-39, returning again to theme B, we see judgment against Israel and the nations. And we read in chapter 10, or in the first part of 36-39, we read the fulfillment of the prophecies about Assyria that were given in chapter 10, verses 5-19. And we're not going to go back and read that, but if you go back and read those verses in chapter 10, you can come here to chapter 36 and the next couple of chapters, and you'll see this fulfillment of these chapter, or those prophecies that were given earlier. We also see Hezekiah's terminal illness and life extension. And again, understanding why is God including Isaiah on God's behalf, including these historical narratives in the book. In some cases, it's fulfilling prophecies given in the book, but or the narrative of a prophecy being given in the book. But again, the whole book, it's all about this judgment, deliverance, and restoration. And so we want to realize that anytime we're reading a narrative, that story is being used to tell the same themes, right? The same message. And so when we read about Hezekiah's terminal illness and his subsequent life extension, because of his repentance and crying out to God, that is a prophetic picture of the nation at that time, certainly, but it's a prophetic picture of Israel overall, and a prophetic picture of mankind overall, and what God is doing, that he's he's proclaiming a judgment, an end. You're going to die. But those who cry out in repentance and and asking for mercy and forgiveness, they are given that life, right? They're restored. So it's a prophetic picture of that. And it was a prophetic picture at the time, because Hezekiah because of Hezekiah's repentance, it brought about God's prophecy fulfillment of Assyria not destroying Jerusalem. And that not only did they get a reprieve, but it has a whole what do I want to call it, a renaissance for some period of time, until finally Babylon comes in and finally destroys them. And we see the final piece of this is the next stage of full judgment for Israel, prophetically pictured in the story of the Babylonian emissaries. So in other words, God is, they still haven't learned their lesson. Hezekiah still is not relying on God, and he's still relying on strategic alignments with other nations for protection, that sort of thing. And God's like, okay, you're not relying on me, and this is the people that are ultimately going to destroy you. And in each of the sections of Isaiah, throughout the repetitions, we have these thematic refrains. In some cases, they'll come in a short, 2 or 3 verses. In other cases, they're spread out over the last section. In this case, this is one of those cases. So you find this thematic refrain throughout chapters 36 through 39. Zion will be restored. We see that in Isaiah 37, 32 through 35, for example. And there's more than just these pieces, but I'm just giving you a few examples. A righteous remnant will be saved, Isaiah 37, 31 through 32. The wicked will be punished, Isaiah 37, 36 through 38. And Israel will be judged, Isaiah 39, 5 through 7. And we in each of these cases, in alignment with the nature of this section being historical narrative, the refrain is being done through historical narrative. So that's and some of the refrains are easier to see because they're so abrupt, and then you get these themes, this thematic refrain, and then you get into a completely different section that has a whole different focus, that sort of thing. In this case, you have that in that whole section, but you definitely have a very big abrupt change between chapter 39 and chapter 40 in the book of Isaiah. So much so that it's caused a lot of controversy for a lot of scholars to treat chapters 1 through 39 and 40 through 66 as 2 different books. And that's it. Our ancient sources, nothing about that in ancient sources, and the ancient scrolls that we have that are complete, they don't have, there's not 2 books, there's just 1 book, and there is no break between like book break or anything like that between or a scroll break rather, between chapter 39 and chapter 40. So there's I want to definitely present and argue this. It's 1 book, but there is a big difference changing from this last piece, culminating in 39, and then chapter 40 takes you in a whole different direction, even a different time period, a much different time period, and it's vaguer. It's more, it's much more futuristic instead of the sort of the now feeling of the whole first section. And so you get a big difference. So that in and of itself as well, that big shift tells you, okay, we're wrapping up, and we in this section, and we can see these themes throughout the section. So if you're reading the last piece and you say, I'm not seeing where John's thematic refrain piece is in here, well, it's in the whole section. Okay. I'm going to open it up for Q&A. That wraps up our overview. Let me stop sharing. Yeah, Greg and Angela.
Yeah, thanks, John. That was really interesting. I I kind of noticed something that, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you kind of gave an overview of the entire book of Isaiah, and it had kind of that palistrophe structure in itself. And then you've got like these different sections which have a palistrophe structure in each section. Is that correct?
Um, no, I don't think the whole book is a palistrophe, because I wouldn't call. Well, I don't know if I've thought about it that way before, Greg. I might have to think about this. That would mean that section 40 through 48 would be the focal point. I'd have to think about that. That's an interesting
Kind of
proposal.
seems to me like maybe it's like a fractal type of structure where the whole thing is kind of like a palistrophe in itself, and then you have each little section. Like you said, we're looking right now at sections chapters 5 to 39, I think. And
Yeah,
you're
5 to
explaining
39.
how that's a palistrophe. And
It's two
anyway,
palistrophes strung together.
right. Well, because it kind of gradually builds up to a focal point and then it goes back in
Yeah.
reverse.
And what's really important is Isaiah begins chapter 1. It tells you it summarizes most of everything in that chapter. It doesn't include you get in the expanded introduction, you get the nations, but the what's happening, and this is common for ancient Near East literature, that doing this thing is that it's repeating the same message over and over again, but in lots of different ways, and introducing new information along the way, or expanded information on what was already said, or maybe repeating the same information in a different way to give more clarity. And so that the idea is you've got these sections repeating over and over again that give you a bigger picture, a more rounded out picture. So if I was trying to teach you something or explain something, and I gave you a short little idea about it first, and then I gave you a bigger idea about it, and then I explained it in a completely different way. Maybe I'm going to use an analogy now to help you understand it better. And then I'm going to tell you a story about an actual event and somebody who actually experienced what I'm trying to, in each of those cases, I'm trying to build a bigger picture for you so you have greater understanding of what I'm trying to say, right? That's, again, a lot of ancient Near Eastern literature works that way. And so this is what's occurring, why these repetitions are occurring, and they're expanding out the information. So the judgment, as far as Isaiah, the book of Isaiah is concerned, in its place in history, it's in the point where God is bringing about this massive judgment on Israel. And so the largest part of the book is on that subject. And so I think it's just reflecting the nature of what's happening in terms of how it's being put together. But I'd have to think. I'll take a look at that and see if I can come up with reasons why the whole thing isn't a palistrophe, with 40 through 48 being the focal point, and see if I can poke holes in it, in that idea, and maybe I will be able to, maybe I won't, and I'll let you know.
Yeah, that was really interesting what you mentioned about with Hezekiah and his terminal illness, and he had a 15-year extension to his life because Judah, or even the entire nation of Israel, were at that time the focus was on Judah, of course, and they had a terminal disease, and and the timing works pretty excellent for a 15 Jubilee cycle extension, because it comes right up to the time of, Jesus' resurrection and the birth of the church and stuff.
Hmm.
If you kind of hear what I'm saying. So when you said that, I like pulled out my calculator and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. Uh, Really interesting point that that little episode with Hezekiah having his life extended does have an application to an extension to the nation as a whole for a period of time.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
interesting.
So Dustin in the chat made a really good point that I'll call out. I'll read his comment and then just comment on this. This is what Dustin writes, with something as voluminous and massive as the book of Isaiah, we should not have the impression that we should only focus on the middle sections and give less weight or study to the first and last sections. So it's really important to remember, like, you couldn't go and read chapters 40 through 48 and understand the book of Isaiah or his message, right? It's and certainly you can't go and read, say, the middle of the Palistrophe of 5 through 12 and really understand the full message of Isaiah, even in that section. That the way these Palistrophes work is that it's surround sound. It's building. So there is a central theme, that focal point. I like to call it a focal point rather than a focus, because focus can mean, well, this is the part that we want to care about and not these other parts. But a focal point means that everything is driving to that point. And so we need to understand these pieces, and we need to understand pieces that were in previous pieces. Like I said, a big chunk of 36 through 39 is actually the fulfillment of the prophecy given in chapter 10. And so if you're reading 36 and on, and you're reading about what's happening, but you've never read or thought about or understood chapter 10, you don't realize, oh, wait a minute, God is actually fulfilling the prophecy that he gave, which was a judgment prophecy. And in doing so, in the overall picture, he's proving that he can bring about his judgments, his promises. And which is going to be really important when he gets to chapters 40 through 48, where he's going to make this promise of a coming Messiah in Cyrus, a coming anointed one that is going to deliver Israel out of bondage. But it's going to happen, many, many years later after Isaiah's death. Well, Isaiah's already demonstrated several times God making a promise of fulfilling a judgment and deliverance and that kind of stuff. And then it actually gets carried out, so that we can then have confidence that all of the promises of God in Isaiah are going to get fulfilled, even if they are not fulfilled until after our lifetimes. Okay, Paul.
Hi, John. First of all, I just want to say thank you for that teaching. It's not the usual kind of teaching going into the analysis chapter by chapter, and neither is it the theme kind of teaching. So I can see that there's a difference here, and initially I thought, okay, this is very technical, but what is the real usefulness behind this? And I think that what Dustin hinted at is the usefulness of it. This is a voluminous book, and it has been written over so many years. You're not looking at something beautifully designed from start to finish, like a novel or what have you, or some modern written book where there's some sort of plan for the complete book when it's first written. This has been added to over years. And I think that what you've given us here is very helpful as a tool for dividing and conquering that voluminous work that is sitting in front of us going in and better understanding it. So we can go back into these different parts of Isaiah part by part, and know how it fits in and where other parts match up also within Isaiah. So for example, the prophecy that you mentioned there that was being fulfilled in Isaiah's lifetime. So I think this is useful, and I want to say thank you for that. I do like the ones that really hit the rubber, or where the rubber really hits the road in terms of teaching. That is changing one, but this is kind of in between, because you have to study the Isaiah yourself, but this tool for studying that will help get that message from there. Yeah, just want to say that and say thank you for that. And I can see why it's not a complete Palistrophe, because it has been written over so many years, and just because he has used that technique in one place does not, just because you've got a hammer doesn't make everything a nail. He doesn't have to use that everywhere, and I can see that it has been written over such a long time. So thanks, John.
Thanks, Paul. That yeah, you have captured it precisely. I wrestled and wrangled for a long time, many months, about how did I want to approach teaching Isaiah. Did I want to do just a short, maybe session or two, very high level overview? Did I want to do an expository, verse by verse teaching over what would have been a number of years? And in the end, from my own perspective, I found that when I was studying Isaiah, really getting at the structure of the book helped me a lot to understand it and start to make sense of it. And it would help then I could take it in chunks and not get lost. And so yes, I absolutely, my goal with this study is not to do an expository approach to it, which would be perfectly fine to do, but purposely not to do that, but to give you a framework within which to read the book, to understand and to study it on your own, and not get lost, and to make sense of it. So yeah, that's it. That's exactly it. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, John.
Other questions? Yeah, Edgardo.
Yes, John, I just want to say that it's so helpful to know the message in advance, just like what you have shared with us a while back. I took a picture of it, the the 4 messages, that were given to us. Because if you don't know the message in Isaiah in advance, it will be too difficult for a Bible student to really understand well the content of Isaiah, because it's a huge book, big book really. Thank God, because I have the message here in advance, so this will serve as a guide for me to understand what really is in Isaiah. So thankful for that. It's a big help for me. Thank you, John.
You're welcome, Edgardo. And I would say this too. As I continue to study Isaiah, I'm constantly learning and seeing things. That I think that I would argue that we in Christianity today don't have a complete understanding of this book. And so, but I do think that we're getting pretty close to, I'm presenting you my view on the framework. Other people are going to have a different concept of, the framework of Isaiah. To me, this was a very helpful framework. It's largely based on Paul Wegner's work on the subject, and a little bit of Alec Mott, your But what I find is that the more that I dig into it, and as I comprehend how the pieces come together and then dig into individual pieces, it helps me to see more than I had seen before. So I think it will be helpful to everyone. Even if you come to a different conclusion about some of the structure, I think it's still helpful. Okay, well, let me go ahead and close this out on the recording. If you're watching this and you'd like to get in contact with us, you can reach us through our website at a2kchurch.org, the number 2 K church.org, or at allegiancetotheking.org. It goes the same place. Or you can find us on Facebook. We've got a Christian Virtual Fellowship Facebook page. There is an Allegiance to the King group that you can ask to be a part of. We'd love to have you be a part of our online fellowship. If you are an isolated biblical Unitarian that doesn't have a local church to go to, that's what this is all about. That's what this is for. In the recordings, you're just seeing the teaching. There's a lot more stuff that goes on in the background, a lot of fellowship and other things happening, including doing communion together and prayer together, prayer services together, small groups, all kinds of things, where the idea is that we can, as best we can remotely from each other, we can be a church family. So if you're interested in that, get in touch with us and we'll get you invited in.